And good evening, everyone. Um, Thank you for joining the Illinois Environmental Council tonight for our Sustainable Transportation Town Hall. My name is Danny Robles, and I am IEC's Legislative Relations Director, and I'm thrilled to be your host tonight. And as folks join in, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping items. Right now, we are recording this town hall, which will be posted on our YouTube. So if folks are uncomfortable being on camera, this is your chance to turn off. And as folks are trickling in, I would love to find out where you're all coming from. So in the chat, please add your name, pronouns, and where you're zooming in from tonight. Um, just so you'll know, all attendees are muted by default. Please use the chat function to ask questions, add comments, provide resources, and we will take live questions at the end. And for those joining by phone, please use *9 to raise your hand. And finally, without saying much, we want to keep tonight's conversation civil and cordial. This is an educational event to learn more about sustainable transportation work that's happening that IEC is planning for 2025. So any profanity, personal attacks, and disruptive behavior will not be tolerated. So please don't make me remove you from the Zoom line. And before we get started with our panelists, I want to walk us through the work of IEC and why we're doing this work ahead of us. So, as many of you might know, since 1975, the Illinois Environmental Council has worked to safeguard Illinois, our people, our plants, our animals, and the natural systems which we all depend on. And we represent over 125 organizations that operate here in Illinois to carry our mission to advance public policies that create healthy environments across Illinois through education, and advocacy and movement building. And to kind of ground us a little bit more about why this is important tonight, I'd like to talk a little bit about the issue at hand, which is that transportation has become the largest source of CO2 emissions and greenhouse gases. As of 2001, 33% of CO2 emissions in Illinois were attributed to transportation, and we see this often play out with pollution and additional harms that come from pollution. One of the things that you'll hear a lot about tonight is diesel pollution and how that also attributes particulate matter and nitrogen oxides that are harmful for our hearts and our lungs. And we see these particular chemicals be very predominant in many of our communities. Here in Illinois, 12 of our counties are in the top 10% of worst counties for particulate matter. Additionally, we face an opportunity here in Illinois to invest in public transit and change the way that we look at our transportation system. I think part of the pollution that we talked about earlier is also attributed to the lack that we don't have roads that are focused on different modes of transportation, and public transit is a key component towards that. And we are facing a very historic opportunity with a deficit that's coming up that we'll talk a little bit more at length in a little bit, but also with the opportunity that we change how the transit agencies coordinate and collaborate in this future together. And finally, one of the things that a lot of our advocates have been working on is changing the way that we talk about how we invest in transportation. For the longest time, we've been focused on being a car-centric society, and I think that's what has led us to the position we're on today, where we're feeling the effects of climate change very acutely year after year. And part of our responsibility here in Illinois is to make sure that we're shifting some of those conversations. So instead of thinking about how do we move faster to provide more lanes for cars, we should really be thinking about how do we build active modes of transportation and build them safer infrastructure that can help us alleviate some of those congestion blocks, but also get people to feel safe walking, biking, and taking other transportation options. Um, so with all these issues to tackle, we have been very fortunate to have a leader in the Illinois House of Representatives who understands the importance of supporting sustainable transportation systems here in Illinois. So it is my privilege tonight to introduce our keynote speaker for tonight, Representative Eva Dina Delgado. Representative Delgado received 100% in IEC's 2024 legislative scorecard. She's also chief sponsor on the Clean Air and Transportation Act and is co-chairing the House working group that is working on the Metropolitan Mobility Authority Act, which is an effort to get more operation funds in our public transit system. So without further ado, I will pass over the mic over to Representative Delgado.
Thank you, Danny, and thank you to everybody who's joining us on this spooky Halloween evening. I am excited to be talking about sustainable transportation options, but more specifically talking about how we make transit better in our region in northeastern Illinois. So I, along with Senator Abraham Billavalam, introduced legislation at the end of our last session creating the Metropolitan Mobility Act, which is essentially taking all of the 4 different transit systems that transit agencies that currently exist today, which is CTA, Metra, PACE, and RTA, and combining them into one agency that is fully integrated with the intent of delivering coordinated regional transit service. So why did we do this? I'm a huge transit advocate. I am a deep believer that cities only function well if you have lots of options to get around. And transit is essential to the state of Illinois and to the growth and economic development here where we live. And today we're facing a really important moment as the result of a rebound or a slow rebound from COVID. And as a result of some of that federal money that came during COVID that helped prop up our transit agencies, those dollars are going away. And Northeastern Illinois Transit is facing what they're calling a fiscal cliff, which means that in the year 2026, there's going to be a $730 million budget hole for the transit agencies in our region. And I think that number is actually low. But never wanting to waste a crisis, this is an opportunity for us to really talk about transformational change in our transit system. And because we have that opportunity, I thought it was very important a couple of years ago, because we knew this was coming, to say if we were to reshape transit in our region and we had a bold vision for what that would be, what ideas would we have? So working closely with the Chicago Metropolitan Planning Agency, or CMAP, we came up with a couple of different ideas about what we would do. And the MMA proposal is what I think is the boldest, which is bringing all the transit agencies together, making sure that those transit agencies are focused on, or that one transit agency is focused on exceptional service, clean and safe rides, having an integrated and affordable system, and making sure that folks can basically get to where they want to go when they want to go. This is what I think it's not terribly revolutionary what I'm talking about, but I feel like this is the first time, at least in recent history, where people are in agreement that transit is important. I believe folks see the importance of it, and here is our chance to actually make that transformational change and find a way to fully invest in what we think is the future of our communities. So I'm really excited to do this. Right now on the House side, we have a working group currently spending time thinking about all the different stakeholders related to transit, thinking about the MMA, and working towards finding that ultimate solution, which for me would include a $1.5 billion annual investment in transit. So that's where we are. I'm super excited to be embarking on this journey along with our partners, which include the IEC. So it's been great to work with the IEC, and I'm hoping that we can continue to build momentum as we go into the spring session.
Thank you so much, Representative Delgado, and we're really excited to be able to partner with you on this. This is such a key component for us to make sure that we are identifying all our climate solutions possible. And, you know, public transit is so essential to make sure that we get people off of cars to their destinations in a safe and productive way. So really appreciate you opening us up with these kind words. And without further ado, tonight you're going to hear a little bit more from community leaders, from policy experts, and folks who have been doing this work on the ground to make sure that we are uplifting these policies. So tonight is not an all-encompassing priorities. There are so many other priorities that we have, but you are going to hear about some key priorities that IEC is embarking on in 2025. So tonight you're going to hear from Jeremy Cuevas, who is the founder of Grassroots Empower Mission and is also transportation organizer with the Northwest Center. You will also hear from Netta Delamy, who is the vehicle electrification manager at the Environmental Defense Fund. Melanie Minucci, who is a senior policy analyst. I forgot to update this slide with the Little Village Environmental Justice Organization. And Kyle Lucas, who is the co-founder and executive director of Better Streets Chicago. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to my friend and colleague, Jeremy Cuevas, to talk a bit more about his involvement with the Metropolitan Mobility Authority.
Thanks, Danny. And thanks everyone for being here, and thanks Delgado for those remarks and being an ally for us in this journey. So basically, I have a couple slides that I just want to talk about really quick. The first slide really just encompasses everything that State Rep Delgado was talking about, how following up on the 2023 Plan of Action for Regional Transit, for short its part, that was released by CMAP, the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning, that basically says that we want to combine all four transit agencies, the RTA, CTA, PACE, and Metra. So what we've seen for decades is like these four different agencies, right? They're competing for funds, duplicating services, and sometimes ignoring decades old requirements for integrated fares. And the new MMA would oversee all bus, rail, and transit operations and responds to the diverse needs of our municipalities, counties, and different parts of the region. So we've been involved in this work for not about the last year. And what we're hearing from the residents, and as you could go to the next slide, Danny, is during our bike rides and during our just one-on-one conversations with community residents, we believe that the new governance structure will give all communities, especially ours, and communities of color in the city of Chicago, and transit system that we look forward. Bus and train schedules, transfers, and fares will work better for the daily user, not against us. I take public transit every single day. I take the Metra, I take the Fullerton bus, and my bike. And just from a personal perspective, I find myself waiting more than 30 minutes, almost 45 minutes for a transfer from the Metra to the bus. And this is due to sometimes the schedules are not always coordinated, right? There's two different transit agencies. You have the Metro, you have the CTA, and sometimes they're not always coordinated. And people like myself, people like the youth that I work with, they're waiting and on longer periods than they should have. And we hope that community voices will be at the decision-making table. I know that one of the goals of the MMA is to have a community advisory board, and that's led by the community. So our hope is that with this new form of governance and making it more simplified, that community voice and community residents can have a voice at the decision-making table when we're talking about fares, when we're talking about schedules, and really speaking truth to power, right? We're not necessarily seeing that right now with the current structure. So our hope is that when the MMA is passed, that that our community and communities across the region will have more of a voice when it comes to decision-making processes. And then the last slide I just want to show very quickly is some of the quotes that we've been hearing from our leaders. You can read them from yourself, but I really like the first one by one of our leaders, Marcelo. He says, "I dream of a day when public transportation works for me instead of having to adjust my plans, schedules, because of unreliable service. And then one of our youth leaders, Emmanuel, said we need cleaner fleets and buses and trains that benefit Chicago and the surrounding suburbs and our planet. Right now, this is something that our leadership and our base is really, really interested in supporting. And this is really why we support the MMA, is because that for far too long, we've been hearing these transit inequities and these stories, and it's time for change. It's time for transportation to start working for us. And like Marcelo said, right, having to change our whole day because of schedules and because of unreliable service. So this is just a short, of why we are supporting the MMA and what it means to us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. I'm gonna pass it over to Melanie to talk a little bit more about some of the work that she's doing with diesel pollution.
Thanks, Danny, and thanks, Jeremy, also for pointing to that last quote. That quote about clean fleets really speaks to me, and I think it's going to go into a lot of what we've been working on. So, good evening, folks. My name is Melanie Minucci. I'm here to talk a little bit about some of the work that we've been doing with the Little Village Environmental Justice Organization as a part of the organization, but then also with the broader coalition of the Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition. So what you're seeing right now on your map or on your screen is a screenshot of the Chicago Truck Counts portal. That was a study that was conducted by the Center for Neighborhood Technology along with LVEJO. And the map that you see shows the compound effects of pollution from multiple sources measured relative to marginalized communities. The color red on the screen signifies areas with the highest freight-focused cumulative burden faced by census block groups within marginalized demographics. The black circles on the screen that you see are locations where trucks and buses were counted during 24-hour periods. And so the bigger the circle, the more vehicles that were counted, specifically trucks and buses that were counted in a given area. I highlighted two specific points. One of them is Archer Heights, the other is Fuller Park. Archer Heights consists of a community that's around 85% people of color, where 78% of folks in that community identify as Latine or Hispanic, and 5,159 trucks and buses were counted in a 24-hour period. So multiply that number by 7 days a week, multiply that by 4 weeks in a month, by 12, and we're talking about over 1 million trucks moving through this area. In Fuller Park, that's another screenshot that is shown here on the screen. Fuller Park is a community that is 98% people of color, where 84% of the population is Black. And similarly, we saw some pretty high numbers as well. In a 24-hour period, 3,712 trucks and buses were counted in that area. And so what you're seeing right now, and along with all the other circles on the screen, is a map that shows the results of years of discriminatory housing and zoning policies that have placed Black, brown, and low-wage communities across the city of Chicago and around, near or around industrial corridors, warehouses, logistics centers, highways, and railroads, where a lot of these a lot of what I just mentioned make up large parts of communities. So the rise in e-commerce and faster shipping methods, easier purchasing methods has also led to a boom in warehouses that's bringing lots of diesel trucks, thousands of diesel trucks more specifically, through and around neighborhoods, generating air pollution that communities are exposed to on a daily basis, which is also generating health impacts, more particularly associated with exposure to diesel exhaust and the consequences that come from that. Next slide, please. So one of the solutions that we've identified, and this is definitely not the end-all be-all solution, there is so much more that needs to be coupled with these clean vehicle and truck standards, but a huge focus of our work has been around the deployment of more zero-emission vehicles in the state of Illinois. So zero-emission vehicles are ones that don't have tailpipe emissions, and they bring huge health and environmental benefits, especially to those communities that y'all saw highlighted on the map in the earlier slide. And so we've worked along with others on this call on a statewide campaign to pass what's known as the Clean Vehicle Truck clean vehicle and truck standards. And so they're not listed here on the screen. Basically, the standards are known as the Advanced Clean Trucks, the Heavy Duty Omnibus Rule, and the Advanced Clean Cars 2 Rule. There are there's specific rules that basically increase the amount of these zero emission vehicles that are made available for purchase in the state of Illinois. One rule specifically focuses not on zero emission vehicles, more so focuses on setting pollution limits for any new diesel engines that are coming out. And so the rules coupled together bring so many health benefits, economic benefits, jobs, and also societal benefits to, again, folks living in areas concentrated with diesel pollution. And so you can see a little bit more about what those vehicles do here on the screen. But again, the focus is really to increase the amount of these vehicles that are made available here in the state of Illinois. Next slide, please. And one of the specific efforts that we've led, and comes after a few years of trying to find many different ways and get creative of how we can actually adopt these rules that have already been adopted in other states. One of those ways was moving through the Pollution Control Board in Illinois. And so a few groups at the beginning of this year got together to petition to the Illinois Pollution Control Board to get these 3 rules adopted here in Illinois. Again, rules have already been adopted in other states, and we're just trying to make sure that our communities here in the state, in Chicago, folks impacted by so much diesel pollution have access to cleaner air. And so if you're able to, and passionate about this as well, or you're impacted by diesel pollution, or you know of somebody who has a personal story, somebody who has asthma, somebody who lives in near or around the areas shown on the map earlier on a few slides ago, we would love for folks to show up and turn out to this event. So this is a hearing happening at the Pollution Control Board. It's happening on December 2nd. You can see more information on the screen right here. So we're looking at folks to be able to provide oral and or written public comment. And so there is a period throughout the hearing where experts are going to be cross-examined, and they're going to be giving testimony on why these rules need to be adopted in Illinois. After that happens, there's going to be a segment for people in the community to show up and really show support for why these rules need to be adopted. And so you can see some of the information on the screen. We're also going to be collaborating on a rally same day to get buzz around these rules, to ensure that the Pollution Control Board, the Illinois EPA, other stakeholders know that communities really care about getting these rules adopted because of the clean health and environmental benefits that come along with those rules. So there's some information on the screen on how you can sign up for an oral comment day of, how you can submit a written comment. I can also on the next screen, I'll show you some more information about how you can get connected to that. But again, that date for the hearing is on December 2nd, and we'd love to see you there. Next slide, please. So this focuses a little bit more on how exactly you can get engaged. So throughout the year, we've been hosting many virtual and in-person educational spaces to learn more about clean vehicles. There's a lot of misinformation around. There's a lot of confusion that's also been, floating around on social media around what clean vehicles really are. And so we've been doing a lot to debunk some of those myths. And we are also co-hosting a statewide webinar with Sierra Club and other organizations that are involved in this Pollution Control Board effort. And so if you're really interested in learning more about the 3 rules that I mentioned above or before, please feel free to scan the QR code. It's the black QR code box on the screen. You can also, the link to the webinar, the statewide webinar is also there. Again, that's going to be a space on November 14th at 6:30 p.m. Central Time to learn more specifically about what the rules are, what benefits they bring to communities, and learn more about this Pollution Control Board process. If you already know that you're down and you really want to support this because, again, you're impacted or you care about EV, there being more EVs available for yourself or your loved ones to purchase, or the importance of the health benefits that EVs bring, and you want to support us, feel free to scan the orange QR code. The orange QR code basically pulls up an interest form where you're able to let us know if you're down and have the capacity to show up on December 2nd to provide public comment. So either way, either opportunity for y'all to engage engine is going to be great and supportive to our effort. Next slide, please. And lastly, I wanted to also make a quick plug for some other opportunities happening through the Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition. So as I mentioned before, the rules that I mentioned are not the only things that are needed to advance this clean energy and clean vehicle transition. The Zero Emissions Vehicle Act looks at these 4 different components you see on your screen. One of them is tackling charging infrastructure by reducing the cost of EV charging by up to 25%. We also see a highlighted importance for transitioning government fleets. So government vehicles and school buses transitioning to zero emission vehicles can provide a phased approach in this transition, ensuring that some of those government vehicles are priority in the transition. And this also feeds onto one of the third points, which focuses on zero emission jobs. The government transition to zero emission vehicles would support there being more opportunities for jobs for folks, whether that's in the charging infrastructure or in the actual manufacturing piece of the vehicles and trucks. General public purchasing of zero emission vehicles will ensure that public funding supports good jobs in the state of Illinois as a whole. And lastly, the effective zero emission vehicle investment is one that collects data on the number and location of zero emission vehicles in Illinois. And so this allows for investments in infrastructure that can then be targeted to areas that need them the most. So again, this is a long transition that's going to happen. We're already getting started, and we're hoping that the rules that I mentioned above, coupled with these policies, will provide clean air, a cleaner environment, and a better future for folks living in industrial corridors, but then just everybody in general impacted by air pollution. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Melanie. And just want to underscore one thing that Melanie had mentioned. One of the reasons why we're seeing a lot of these heavy duty vehicles on our road is this increase in e-commerce in the country. And here in Illinois, we are kind of ground zero for a lot of this e-commerce, which kind of leads us to our next conversation with Netta to talk a little bit more about truck pollution and how we can work with some of the warehouses in the state to make some of these shifts happen in the near term.
Yeah, thank you. Melanie did a really great job setting up the issue of transportation emissions. So I'm Netta from EDF. I'm going to be talking to you about a little heard of but very important policy called the indirect source review. It basically seeks to address air pollution in overburdened areas that have a lot of truck traffic. Next slide, please. So as Danny mentioned, there's been an e-commerce boom in the past few decades. And with that, the warehousing and distribution logistics industry has grown with it. Warehouse square footage has grown 34% in the last decade in Illinois. More and more of them are located near homes and schools than ever before, impacting residents and workers. EDF did some research with our proximity mapping, showing the impact that 1 in 5 Illinois residents are within half a mile of over 4,300 warehouses. They total 850 million square feet. That's about 15,000 football fields. And they generate more than 650,000 truck trips a day. Next slide. Like other environmental injustices, the burden of truck pollution is not equitably shared. Areas with higher percentages of Black or Hispanic and Latino populations, like here in Southwest Chicago with the darker green, have more warehouses, and with insufficient numbers of these diamonds shown on this map here, which are EPA grade air quality monitors, they're not near those warehouses either. And this is true across the state, even though environmental justice communities are only 1% of the state in land area, 42% of warehouses are in those communities. Next slide. Diesel pollution from trucks are very dangerous. They're deadly, and those effects have costs for all of us. The map on the left shows how that air quality monitoring network hasn't kept up with the growth in warehouses, suggesting it's worse than we even know. And it is bad. There are about 40 cancer-causing substances in diesel fuel, including lead, arsenic, formaldehyde, but I'm going to talk about 2 that trucks are especially disproportionately responsible for, which we kind of went over, but just a little more detail about the really bad health impacts, particulate matter, nitrogen oxides. Nitrogen oxides, you might have heard of NOx or NO2, are deadly gas that contribute to smog, climate change, but they also damage your respiratory system lining. They exacerbate and cause asthma, and they can kill you. And even though diesel trucks don't contribute a lot to the total vehicles on the road, they're only about 7%, they contribute the vast majority of the nitrogen oxide, 67%. Truck-related pollution, that is NO2, is responsible for 1,300 deaths a year in Chicagoland alone. And you can see from the map on the right that it contributes to a lot of childhood asthma across the state. Then there's particulate matter, especially particulate matter 2.5, and it's so called for the tiny size. They're only there are soot particles that are 30 times smaller than a human hair, and they can reach deep into your lungs and bloodstream, and they stay there. Any exposure is bad exposure for that reason. It causes lung disease, heart disease, stroke, and it kills over 400 Illinoisans a year. The economic impact of those health effects, like missed work days, all the healthcare costs for people who have those conditions, costs an estimated $4.6 billion last year. Next slide. So clearly diesel pollution in particular and the density around the warehouses needs to be regulated, but we don't really have a mechanism for it right now. They aren't like a stationary source like this power plant in the background. Trucks are more mobile sources technically, like the vehicle here, and vehicles ordinarily are regulated through efficiency standards on manufacturers, but those don't guarantee that their cleaner vehicles that they have, like the electric trucks mentioned that have no tailpipe emissions, are actually being driven where we need them to be in the most polluted areas. One way, of course, is the clean vehicle and truck standards that Melanie mentioned. But another way is indirect source review that I'll get to. We also don't want to put the responsibility on truck drivers. Many independently own and operate their trucks. They're small businesses. I mentioned a couple of trucks isn't great for pollution. Any exposure is bad, but it's not a couple of trucks causing this issue. It is mega warehouses, often owned by huge corporations. I don't have to name them for you to know who I'm talking about, who chose to be located near other warehouses. They're contributing to the density of pollution in and near residential areas who are already overburdened by truck traffic. And that's how you get thousands of trucks in one intersection in 24 hours. So the idea of facilities bearing the responsibility of truck pollution that they are attracting is like the basic principle behind the indirect source rule. They are an indirect source of pollution that need to be regulated. Next slide. So the needs that are kind of behind the idea of indirect source rule that we care about are transparency with these facilities. We don't have a public registry of warehouses. We don't know who owns them, how many truck trips they're generating, information like that we think the public, and especially neighbors and workers, deserve to know. We also want to have an accessible and transparent way to engage the community in permit review investigations to hold everyone accountable. Next, because workers often both work and live in the overburdened communities, impacts on them need to be considered, their livelihoods need to be considered, and any solutions need to integrate them as well. And then lastly, the pollution mitigation itself. Next slide. So this is the actual policy, indirect source review. Basically, the idea is facility owners or operators have to take actual steps to reduce pollution. These steps earn them points that let them get or keep their permits, or they pay a fine if they don't. They can choose from a whole menu of options based on whatever works for them, and the points they need to satisfy are determined by their facility size, mega warehouse or not, and their emissions that they emit. The options that they can do include things like acquiring electric truck trips, using electric yard trucks to move containers. They can install air filters in nearby homes or schools or daycares or hospitals. They can install solar panels. They can contribute to nearby e-bikes or EV car share. And here's a great example, this picture from Southern California, which is the only place that has instituted an indirect source review so far, the South Coast Air Quality Management Districts. Warehouses have been doing this for a few years now. This is a Costco warehouse that installed solar panels on its chargers for electric yard trucks. They have a plan to electrify all their warehouses, but they did it first in this area because of ISR, indirect source review. That's all. That's my email.
Thanks, Netta. Appreciate it. To wrap us up on our policy priorities, we want to talk a little bit more about, shifting towards other active modes of transportation. And for that, I welcome Kyle Lucas to talk a little bit more about the work that he has been doing with Better Street Chicago.
Yeah, thank you so much, Danny. I'm Kyle Lucas. I'm one of the co-founders and the executive director of Better Street Chicago. We are a grassroots organization very focused on improving people's access to infrastructure for walking, rolling, biking, and taking transit. And we know very intimately that in addition to electrification, that in order for us to achieve our climate goals, we really need to shift how our region's perspective is on how people get around and change people's behaviors. And really making investments in infrastructure that enables people to make active transportation choices as their first option. And we understand why right now a lot of people don't make those choices in their everyday lives. A lot of times biking and walking are options that are either unavailable or they can be incredibly dangerous. A lot of our communities are designed directly around the automobile rather than alternatives. A lot of times our communities don't have access to walkable amenities like grocery stores and neighborhood schools, things like that, within communities to enable people to remain more local and use those options. But we know that they're also unsafe, and people are really rightfully hesitant to consider those as options in their everyday modes. Personally, I feel this very intimately. In the last year, I have been hit 3 times while riding my bike in the city. And that was, as someone who is working very at the grassroots level, I frequently use, different gig apps in order to supplement my income. And all 3 of those times I was hit was while I was working, while I was riding a bike and doing food deliveries. So, there are a lot of reasons why this is so important, from, just the choices that people can make every day to to workers' rights and beyond. And so these, making investments in this type of infrastructure has clear climate implications, but also has clear quality of life and public safety implications. So with this, the departments of transportation and in particular, the Illinois Department of Transportation do not prioritize alternatives in their planning and designs. And this is nothing new. As many of you have probably heard about, automobile-centric design has been at the core of how we plan transportation for decades. But we understand that in order for us to actually change the way that people get around and to actually change the trajectory of our climate, we have to change how we plan. Let's go to the next slide. So where we are currently, in the Chicago region, marginal improvements on investment have been made. I know that this is similar in some communities around the state of Illinois as well, where we have local departments of transportation who have started to make some of these changes. We see things like pedestrian bump outs. We see, protected bike lanes being installed. But a lot of times there's still some disjointed ways in which people can actually utilize those pieces of infrastructure, because they might disappear across different types of boundaries, whether that be in Chicago specifically, it can be across ward lines, but sometimes it even just comes down to a jurisdiction of like who actually owns that piece of roadway, who is overseeing it. So that, the city of Chicago can only do so much within, what roads they actually control versus ones that are at the state level. Other improvements that we have seen, in 2019, there was a bill passed that for the first time ever in state history, we have a $50 million pool for a bike walk fund. And so that allows municipalities in the state of Illinois to apply for grants to fund different bike and walk investments. So this is really big because that hadn't existed before. But as you might imagine, $50 million for the entire state of Illinois doesn't get us too far. So it is a step in the right direction, but we have a long way to go in actually enabling all municipalities to be able to access funds like this. Something that I think is really important to note is that the city of Chicago basically never applies for these grants because it just it's a drop in the bucket for the city of Chicago and the kinds of investments that we actually need for our infrastructure. So, it's really important that we have that, but it almost has no impact on our region as a whole. We need a significantly larger investment to actually be able to create change on northeastern Illinois, where we understand that the largest climate impact is had. And the third point, which I've alluded to already, is that the Illinois Department of Transportation continues to be the most significant roadblock for municipalities. And this is really exposed in the city of Chicago specifically. If you're familiar with Chicago, our biggest and most dangerous and scariest roads are all controlled by the state. That's, Irving Park Road, Pulaski, Stony Island, Western Avenue, any of those giant roads where you're like most scared to cross the street or where you would never even consider riding a bike down, those are controlled by the Illinois Department of Transportation. They specifically are really resistant to any kinds of alternative modes on their streets. They are very rigid in their modeling in requiring a level of service for automobiles. And really, there's not a lot of wiggle room at all to consider alternatives like public transportation, cycling, and pedestrians. And we know that that has to change in order for us to actually be able to create the infrastructure that enables people to feel comfortable and confident in using alternatives. So we'll go to the last slide here, where there is a significant piece of legislation that's part of the Clean and Equitable Transportation Act that can help us shift the narrative on how we actually invest in infrastructure. And so this is the Transportation Choices Act. So this component will actually, for the first time ever in Illinois history, require the Illinois Department of Transportation and MPOs, so that's planning organizations such as the Chicago Metropolitan or CMAP, to actually implement greenhouse gas reduction targets. Now, that can mean a lot of different things, but ultimately, when we're talking about the actual planning of a roadway, that means that they have to be able to consider how they can reduce greenhouse gases through their designs, how they're planning for it. So this would be a giant trajectory change right now. With this bill would also require them to show compliance with those targets in a public planning process. This is not something that's required right now. They would have to implement some scoring that helps us see based off of their designs how they actually are scoring their roads based off of ones that they've done previously. And then there would be enforcement requirements that allows for it, like if they don't actually meet that target compliance, that they have to change their designs in order to achieve them. And so this would be a huge shift in how we currently plan our roadways. And like I said previously, the Illinois Department of Transportation right now is one of the biggest roadblocks in actually accomplishing a lot of our goals for transportation, for allowing people to choose how they get around. We have a lot of people in Illinois who get around by driving because they don't have a choice. The roads aren't safe for them to get around walking or biking, or public transportation isn't a viable option because the buses are slow or there's no trains nearby. So actually requiring these types of considerations when we're planning our networks will help us to ultimately change the way that we enable people to get around by requiring our DOTs to plan for that. So we're really excited about this, and we'll, the Illinois Environmental Council, Better Street Chicago, will be in touch with all of you in the coming weeks and months about ways that you can support the Transportation Choices Act, as well as the entire Clean and Equitable Transportation Act.
Thank you so much, Kyle, and to all our speakers. I know there was a lot of information, and just want to welcome people. If you all have any questions, please feel free to drop in a chat, raise your hand to ask a question. If you are dialing via phone, you can hit *9 to raise your hand and *6 to mute and unmute. So we'll give it a sec to see if there's any questions from our participants tonight. I do have something here from Aaron. Deeply respect you all putting this together. Happy Halloween. This is a subject that's very close to him. 2 questions. Downstate is hard to explain what EJ community is in this conversation. Who would represent this important voice? And then second question is, what would be the best way to step down a fossil liquid fuel gasoline? What would something like that fuel transition look like? Love to open that question to our panelists.
I can take a stab at that first piece around downstate
Definitely.
engagement. So that's actually a really good point. And I think one of the maps, I think it was a map that Netta showed, that there's a lot of truck movement and traffic that is also a big concern down by the East St. Louis region. And we're actually having a lot of our workshop conversations. We're partnering with an organization, a community-based organization out in that region. Yes. Like right where you see right where St. Louis is, right there, you can see that there's like elevated warehouse dots, and then there's also truck traffic as well. And so that has been a concern. We actually hosted a workshop, I want to say it was on Tuesday or on Wednesday. That was the first time we were speaking specifically to the adoption of the clean vehicle rules that I mentioned earlier. And so this is a really big concern to community over there. They're also more recently undergoing newer air monitoring efforts down there. And so we're looking at ways to kind of like tie everything together, right? So folks are experiencing air pollution, they're experiencing truck traffic. And so bringing more zero emission vehicles is not only going to benefit folks in Chicago, but also folks in the East St. Louis region that are struggling with this. So we've been working closely with them, and we'll be continuing to engage with that group along with others that come along in the way. I think the biggest, I want to say, obstacle we've come across is really just ensuring that we're creating educational spaces where people can learn about the benefits of zero emission vehicles that again extends beyond Chicago and the Chicagoland area. But that's a really great question.
And then there's the second question about best way to step down for fossil liquid fuel and gasoline. Anyone want to take a stab at that question?
Well, I'm guessing based off of who is asking the question, that we might be alluding to low carbon fuel standards in Senator Taylor's bill, but I obviously am a fan of rapid decarbonization of transportation through electrification. But I do think that everything that we've talked about tonight shows how there's a suite of policy options, as policy advocates love to always say, that electrification in particular, electricity tends to be most places, and it works for especially if you have a home, single family home, you have the infrastructure there already. It saves you money, it's convenient, and in places where there is more urbanization, we really need to build out transit and walkability, and that is really the I think long-term decarbonization of transportation that I see to both fight climate change as well as make air quality better for everyone. That's like the short answer.
Thank you. Aaron drop his email if you want to keep the conversation going. Any other questions? Question for y'all. What is the best way to stay connected with the work that your organizations are doing? And maybe we can popcorn it around. Why don't we start with Kyle?
Sure. Yeah, so the best way to stay connected with us is honestly our email list. So if you go to betterstreetchicago.org and click our Get Involved tab, and fill out our form, we would love to have you join us. And we reach out via email all the time about different ways that you can get plugged in. We're very City of Chicago focused, so I know that maybe not everyone on this call is looking to reach out to their alderperson in Chicago. But if you are, we have a lot of ways in which you can, amplify your voice on the issues that that we all collectively agree on. And we're looking to really push our city as well as our state representatives to actually enact meaningful change. Yeah, that's the best way. betterstreetchicago.org.
Thanks, Kyle. How about Jeremy?
Yeah, hey everyone. Best way for us is our websites. I can add those in the chat in a couple of seconds, and also our social media links if you all want to give that a follow, or our website. We can you can subscribe to our email list, and I think those are the best ways.
Amazing. Netta?
EDF is a national organization, but really the Illinois work that we do, I would say our like partners like IEC and Melanie is like the eyes and ears of grassroots organization. I think on the ground, I think policy needs those partners to actually come to fruition. So I'll pass it to her, whatever she says, listen to her.
With that, Melanie.
Yeah, for sure. I would say probably social media. We're hosting a lot of in-person events. We've hosted a ton this year. Now that it's getting colder, I think we're going to slow down on that and do more virtual ones. But I know we have some upcoming engagements, and so I want to say social media, Facebook, Instagram, I think are two of the main platforms that we use to get the word out on all of our events.
Perfect. Well, y'all, I want to thank all the panelists and speakers tonight for offering their time and expertise on this. And like I mentioned at the top, this is just a small snapshot of the transportation work, but also the small snapshot of the work that IEC is doing. So if y'all are interested in learning more about other upcoming town halls that talk about the other issue areas, feel free to visit our website at illinoisenviro.org. Our next one is going to be next Thursday at 6 p.m. and we're going to talk a little bit more about sustainable agriculture. That information is right there on the screen, but I'm going to drop a quick link for everyone so y'all have time to sign up for it. So hopefully we see some of y'all next Thursday and learn a little bit more about how we are gonna continue cleaning up our food systems in Illinois. So once again, thank you all. Happy Halloween. If you have some time, go trick or treat or go watch a scary movie, and we'll be in contact soon. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.